The moment of triumph has arrived. Europe has stood up for Ukraine in a truly grown-up way. Berlin is going all in for Kyiv. Merz made Trump take a seat. Germany has rolled up its sleeves and is now working solely for Kyiv's victory. No more pauses or unspoken words. The map of Ukraine is on the table, along with solid arguments. It happened live right in the Oval Office. The old continent has stood shoulder to shoulder with Ukrainians. Europe has opened its arsenals and is playing on Volodymyr Zelensky's side until the final whistle. The West is ready to bring in the military. The best fighters are on standby. London and Paris are putting on the gloves of strength. Meanwhile, Brussels is building a bridge for Ukraine, and those who were holding things back are left behind. Hungary couldn't withstand the pressure after all. Orban's total failure is making Putin lose his mind. Europe has managed to leave Russia and its microworld on the sidelines. We'll talk about all of this next. No sugarcoating. This is Ukraine Today, and I'm Darina Hotskalo. The start has been made. Right now, Europe is fighting for Ukraine. Germany is slamming its diplomatic fist right on the table. Patience has snapped. There will be no more obedient and patient Europeans. This is the first warning bell for Donald Trump. The levers of influence are changing dramatically. Support for official Kyiv is growing at the speed of light. It seems that Merz has managed to win Trump's favor. On Tuesday, the president called the chancellor a friend and praised him for truly excellent work. Trump also expressed gratitude to the chancellor for his rhetorical support of the U.S. strikes on Iran, stating that Merz is helping us and is very gracious about this issue. In fact, this was Merz's strategy during negotiations with Trump. Now let's go into more detail. Friedrich Merz and Donald Trump met in the Oval Office. Private diplomacy with a map of Ukraine in hand, after which, unexpectedly, the voice of Europe now sounds as if through a megaphone. The U.S. is stunned by such audacity. The effect is immediate. He got the impression that the president now better understands what is at stake for this country when it comes to the need to avoid territorial concessions. Merz bluntly told Trump Ukraine must hold on to its land, otherwise the road to Kyiv will be open. He made no secret of the fact that Odessa is the country's key gateway to the Black Sea, without which the defense would falter. And another powerful message struck like thunder out of a clear sky. No deals without Europe's involvement. Not a single step back.
At the negotiations, I advocated for increasing pressure on Moscow. After 4 years of war, the Russian economy has noticeably weakened. The Russian army has suffered an unprecedented bloody toll. Today, the Russian giant stands on clay feet. Only when Washington starts putting pressure on Russia again will President Putin be ready to make concessions.
Moreover, now Europe is preparing to take the lead ahead of the U.S. Washington must step back. New conditions and a new way of making fateful decisions.
Trump knows that only a peace supported and legitimized by Europe can truly be lasting. He also knows that Europe's contribution to Ukraine's security, recovery, and European integration will be simply indispensable for this peace.
And as a result, immediately after, a loud statement: America is not going to stray from its path. It seems the head of the White House is more determined than ever and assured that ending Russia's war against Ukraine still remains his highest priority. So now the U.S. bows its head before Europe.
As for Russia and Ukraine, where does that stand on my list of priorities? Very high. I thought it would be one of the easiest. I have ended 8 wars and maybe one more.
However, it's not just about a diplomatic knockout. The stakes are higher than ever. Europe has opened its warehouses and is no longer holding back. This has happened for the first time. The West has become the sponsor of Ukraine's counteroffensive in the south. A comeback right on the battlefield. Aviation munitions and surveillance systems are being sent to the armed forces of Ukraine straight from the French defense industry. A real slap in the face to the Kremlin's plans. The air was filled with the scent of victory. This very agreement provides for the funding of French production of air-to-ground aviation munitions, which are a key element of offensive air operations. A comprehensive approach in action. Precision weapons and radars that are bringing Russia's defeat closer are already in Ukraine. The EU has stepped up the supply of the latest air defense systems. Now, work on defending the skies is not just words but action. Berlin is closing our skies with Iris-T and pushing armor forward. The United Kingdom was one of the first to provide long-range Storm Shadow missiles. And the front immediately felt the difference. Before that, there were thousands of NLAW anti-tank systems, training for our soldiers, and large-scale ammunition packages. France supplied Caesar self-propelled howitzers, scalp missiles, and armored vehicles. Paris doesn't just talk, it strengthens Ukrainian artillery where the fate of positions is decided. From the very first days, Poland opened its warehouses. T-72 tanks, Krab self-propelled howitzers, and ammunition. And in fact, it became a logistics hub for all the weapons going to Ukraine. The Czech Republic initiated the ammunition coalition. Millions of artillery shells are being sought and purchased all over the world for the armed forces of Ukraine. The Scandinavians and the Netherlands have joined the aviation coalition, are preparing to transfer F-16s, and are investing in air defense and missiles. And this is just a small part. Our partners are showing that they are ready to stand as a wall for justice. Europe is now playing openly. Not only is there now unrestricted weaponry for Ukraine, but also NATO troops. Britain and France are ready to become the initiators of a major disruption of forces. Now, officially, London and Paris are planning to send up to 10,000 troops to Ukraine.
I want to be the Minister of Defense who sends British troops to Ukraine because that would mean the end of this war. It means that we have reached a peace agreement in Ukraine. And a safe Europe needs a strong, sovereign Ukraine.
And most importantly, this is not just another declaration, but a real step that could set a precedent for the participation of European forces in security operations on our side. What the bunker dweller feared so much may finally happen. Putin's camp has started making a fuss prematurely. Britain and France are preparing to arm Kyiv with a nuclear bomb, reported the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service. The British and French allegedly want to disguise the transfer of nuclear weapons to Kyiv as Ukraine's own development. Immediately afterward, the official Kremlin also issued a statement. Dmitry Peskov has now spread the fake news on camera about Paris and London allegedly intending to give Kyiv a nuclear bomb, calling it a blatant violation of international law. In response, Britain struck with the fist of truth and declared this an attempt by Vladimir Putin to divert attention from his own horrific actions in Ukraine. Official Kyiv also stood up for its partners and issued a strong statement.
Usually when Russia fails to win on the battlefield, they start looking for nuclear weapons on the territory of Ukraine. There are no nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Unfortunately, you know all the circumstances, and thanks to what and to whom this happened.
Maybe for now without nuclear weapons, but definitely in the EU. Europe is stepping on the gas at the decisive stage of Ukraine's accession to the alliance. Everyone acknowledges that issues of politics, budget, and security are all at stake. The European Commission and some capitals are discussing the idea of partial membership or membership light, a model that would allow for partial integration into the EU without waiting for full membership right away. Moreover, the process is not standing still. In February, the European Union handed Kyiv a document listing the reforms necessary for joining the bloc. It is according to these requirements that Ukraine's readiness for membership will be assessed.
For our part, we are committed to doing everything possible to help Ukraine move forward in this process, because it is truly accomplishing tremendous work under extremely difficult conditions.
Obviously, it is too early to talk about specific timeframes for the country's triumph in the EU. Nevertheless, Volodymyr Zelensky remains optimistic and openly states that by 2027 we will be technically ready to open all 6 negotiation clusters. There is little time for hesitation. Putin is advancing on the 5th and trying to trip us up.
Obviously, he does not want Ukraine to become a full member of the EU.
And the Russian dictator will do this primarily through Hungary. That's why the Kremlin needs the jester Viktor Orban. Nevertheless, due to the blockade from Budapest, Brussels is developing a mechanism that would allow Ukraine's accession to move forward despite the veto of individual member states. Checkmate Putin. The main message is that voting on such packages should not require the consent of all 27 countries. And this is a signal to change the rules so that a single member cannot block key decisions for Kyiv. Hungary now finds itself almost entirely opposed to the general European course, and more EU capitals are expressing their readiness to move around Budapest in order not to let Orban dictate EU policy on the war and support for Ukraine. It seems that Russia's secret roots in Europe simply no longer have a chance to exist. The situation inside Hungary is also complicated. Orban is actively ramping up anti-NATO and anti-Ukrainian rhetoric. And all of this is happening in a pre-election frenzy that seems to have completely engulfed him. His party is lagging in the polls and facing a serious political challenge. Could this be the end?
He has fewer allies, fewer opportunities to justify himself with claims of domestic necessity, and he will suffer from overestimating his own capabilities.
Meanwhile, Ukraine is openly awaiting a political explosion in Budapest. President Zelensky himself openly says that after Orban loses the election, relations between Ukraine and Hungary will return to normal.
I believe that Orban will lose the election, and then we will be able to restore normal relations with Hungary as well, because the Hungarian people are not pro-Russian.
It seems that Orban has been cornered from all sides. The course toward a pro-European Hungary has begun. The politicians' energy war is coming to nothing, and this can no longer be hidden. In Brussels and Washington, they are no longer playing polite. There are decisions on the table that will completely change the energy map of Europe. For Budapest, this is a serious blow, the end of the old game and the start of a new era without Russian dependence. Get ready. The world of energy will never be the same again. Let's watch. Orban has played his last card. The friendship is over. The oil pipeline that has been pumping oil to Europe for decades is now under threat.
This was the project of the century. Let me remind you, when these gas pipelines were being built from the USSR to Europe back in the 70s, it was even called the deal of the century, the project of the century, the construction of these pipelines. Now is the time to abandon this project of the century.
The European Union and the United States continue to push out Russian energy resources, planning a complete halt to gas imports by January 2028, and the share of Russian oil has already dropped to 3%. The strategic goal of the European Commission remains unchanged: to end all imports of raw materials from the Russian Federation by the end of 2027. On April 15th, the European Commission will present a legal proposal for a permanent ban on the import of Russian oil. This is happening 3 days after the parliamentary elections in Hungary so that the oil ban does not become a major factor in the election campaign. The EU wants to enshrine a complete and gradual phase-out of Russian oil in legislation, which will remain in force even if a peace agreement in Ukraine leads to the lifting of European sanctions.
Russia is losing its pro-Russian forces, which, back in the waning days of the Soviet Union and at the beginning of Ukraine's independence, there was a very popular Italian TV series called Unspult. And there was a phrase in it, our friends are only those whom we can buy. So Russia's friends are those whom Russia can buy. If Russia can no longer buy friends, if it has no resources, then Russia simply won't have any friends either. At the same time, Russia itself, which largely earns money on the European market, Vladislav Chali says, is losing its most profitable market, because what remains is only the Chinese market.
Hungary and Slovakia are among the last importers of Russian oil remaining in the European Union. Other EU members have found new suppliers for themselves over the past 4 years. According to Reuters, deliveries of Russian oil via the southern branch of Druzhba amounted to 9.7 million tons in 2025. Slovakia received almost 5 million and Hungary a little over 4 million. Vladislav Chali says,
huge purchases of energy resources from Russia. Listen, in the first 10 months of 2025, the EU paid Russia $26 billion, as far as I remember. Mostly for energy resources. So on the one hand, you say that Russia is a threat to you, but on the other, you give it money by buying its resources. And you don't have to buy these resources from Russia. You can buy them elsewhere. So in essence, you are bringing to life Lenin's famous saying, where he said that they would hang the capitalists with the very rope those same capitalists would sell them.
Hungary gets Russian oil 15 to 20% cheaper than it could buy it from other suppliers. Profits from reselling cheap Russian oil at market prices in Hungary do not go toward lowering prices for the population, but are instead accumulated for the benefit of a narrow circle of elites connected to Viktor Orban's government, experts say. Vladislav Chali says,
one specific and significant aspect of this corruption is when they say, look, you will work tirelessly to guarantee that Russian resources are channeled directly through your hands. And as a direct result of this, you will get these resources at substantially discounted and lower prices. This margin that will appear will end up in your pockets, and you will have a direct benefit, which is then used to stay in power and for your election campaigns. Therefore, these are not the interests of Hungary and Slovakia. These are the interests of Orban and his circle. These are the interests of Fico and his circle, who want to profit from Russian resources by reselling them to Europe.
The United States is also striking at Russian energy carriers. However, for Washington, the key is not oil but gas. Hungary already signed a contract with the United States for gas supplies back in December of last year. And if the southern branch of Druzhba is finally shut down and Hungary switches to American gas and nuclear fuel, it will not only be a blow to the Kremlin's revenues, but also the removal of the last levers of energy blackmail. Vladislav Chali says,
the strategy of the Soviet Union, which was passed on to Russia, is to make Europe dependent on itself through this so-called gas needle. Just as individuals struggling with addiction become deeply dependent on illicit substances through these needles, in the specific case of natural gas, the significant advantage of obtaining cheap resources from Russia makes the landscape of European political decision-making, let's say, increasingly subservient and beholden to Russia's strategic interests. In other words, Russia makes you dependent on its energy resources, and reforms are carried out in European countries that maintain dependence on Russian resources. And this situation, first and foremost, primarily serves to benefit the nation of Russia.
No matter how hard Putin tries to keep his allies, he will not succeed. Sensational! Putin couldn't take it anymore and decided to seriously spite Europe one last time, disrupting world peace live on air. Over 150 terrorist attacks and acts of sabotage across the entire EU. In a single moment, the Kremlin's agent network cracked. Spies were caught red-handed even in places where locks and alarms seemed unbreakable. Moscow is now on pins and needles. The hybrid war has spun out of control and the bunker dweller is racking his brain trying to figure out how to escape this labyrinth. Europe is not going to stay silent, the response will be tough and Putin risks losing control over his own game. Be the first to know? Russia is attacking Europe. Since the start of the full-scale war in Ukraine, the aggressor country has carried out about 50 hybrid attacks in European countries. Hybrid attacks include assassination attempts, for example, on opposition figures and defected intelligence officers, assaults, kidnappings, arson, explosions, sabotage, vandalism, and disturbances of public order.
Well, as we know, recently the Russian trace has been visible in quite a large number of acts of sabotage occurring in different countries, including the Baltic states and Poland, and various other sophisticated elements of hybrid warfare, such as the frequent use of drones, can be seen in a wide range of different countries as well, Germany, for example, and many suspicious objects are currently flying into the airspace of Scandinavian countries.
The largest number of attacks, 64, were recorded by experts in 2024. In the second half of 2025 and at the beginning of 2026, 12 hybrid attacks were recorded in Europe. Moreover, Russian special services were directly identified in only one of these attacks. All the others were carried out through intermediaries.
And the GPS signal is being jammed. We are seeing a variety of manifestations. So, sabotage is merely one of the many multifaceted components of the complex hybrid warfare strategy that Russia is currently waging against Europe today.
31 acts of sabotage were recorded in Poland. Right behind it is France, where 24 acts of sabotage have occurred since 2022. Then the numbers decrease. In Lithuania and Germany, there have been 15 incidents each over 4 years. In the United Kingdom, 12, and in Estonia, 11. A total of 172 perpetrators were involved, and just over half of them knew who was actually coordinating them.
And accordingly, criminal cases are being investigated against specific perpetrators. While it appears that appropriate sentences are indeed being handed down by the courts, in such complex legal cases, it is always extremely difficult to definitively prove any specific kind of direct state involvement. It is a challenge to establish that a specific formal order came directly from the very top of the hierarchy. Let's say, for example, from the Supreme Commander-in-Chief himself, the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin.
Recruitment took place through prisons, job search websites, but most often through Telegram. People agreed to carry out sabotage for a few €100. Some were offered several thousand for particularly difficult tasks.
It is something that we fully and completely understand, that there may also be such sleeper agents who were originally recruited a very long time ago, people who may have even lived within the borders of Ukraine before. Furthermore, it has become increasingly clear to us that such recruited individuals had both Ukrainian and Belarusian passports. Therefore, as a result, depending on, let's say, the specific time of their recruitment, these could be both long-standing, experienced operatives and newly recruited ones.
Analysts note that the scale of sabotage operations increased after more than 600 Russian agents were expelled from Europe since 2018. Having lost intelligence officers who worked under diplomatic cover, the Kremlin switched in Europe to recruiting civilian agents.
However, even this does not frighten Europe. The partner countries rushed headlong into the fight for Ukraine. Ramstein erupted like never before. London, Berlin, and dozens of European capitals are supplying Kyiv with everything in their arsenals: drones, air defense systems, artillery, and secret technologies. Ukrainian forces will receive strike power that will shatter any plans Moscow has. The Kremlin is in a complete state of shock. The West is not joking. The first shocking details are coming up next.
One of the largest military aid packages of the entire war. The new Ramstein meeting ended with a major victory for Ukraine and a personal triumph for Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov. Yes, as a result of the meeting, the partners confirmed the allocation of $38 billion in military aid to Ukraine. The funds will go towards drones, air defense systems, and Patriot missiles.
It is important that the Ramstein format has been preserved, despite the change in approach in the United States when the Donald Trump administration shifted its focus to selling weapons. The Ramstein format continues to serve as one of the most vital and essential mechanisms that allows for comprehensive medium-term strategic planning looking several months ahead for the systematic procurement and acquisition of necessary weaponry.
For example, Minister Fedorov stated that more than $6 billion have already been allocated in specific aid packages, including over $2.5 billion for Ukrainian drones, more than $500 million for the PURE program, $2 billion for air defense, as well as funds for artillery ammunition, preparation for naval operations, and other areas.
We see that Russia cannot defeat us on the ground. We see that Russia is waging war against our civilian population. Russia is targeting our civilian infrastructure, heating plants and power stations. I would like to thank you for your support. This is very important to us. We continue to fight against Russian aggression. And yes, our strategy is working.
It is also worth noting that Ukraine has reached agreements with a number of European partners for the urgent supply of missiles for Patriot systems from their stockpiles. For security reasons, the quantity is, of course, not being disclosed.
In the future, Ukraine needs reliable security guarantees. I am absolutely confident that the flow of vital American weaponry to Ukraine will continue. As I have already said, about 90% of Ukraine's critically important air defense needs are met by Patriot missile systems, and I am absolutely confident that this flow will continue.
At the forefront of those ready to ensure this flow, as is tradition, are London and Berlin. Yes, the United Kingdom is allocating £500 million for air defense and another £150 million for the PURE initiative. In total, £3 billion have been earmarked for military aid to Ukraine in 2026. This time, Germany has focused on drones. At least $1 billion will be allocated for the purchase of drones. The country is also investing in air defense and in a program to train and equip the newly formed drone assault units of the Ukrainian armed forces. In total, 11.5 billion euros have been allocated.
NATO itself has expressed a profound interest in the comprehensive development of such protocols in order to engage in more frequent and direct interactions with Ukraine and provide more robust and consistent assistance to the nation. To implement the very PURE initiative for purchasing American weapons with European funds, and at the same time to actively participate in new joint military-industrial complex projects with Europe.
Norway also came as a pleasant surprise. For 2026, $7 billion have been allocated for Ukraine. This includes drones, air defense systems, artillery, as well as the purchase of weapons from the United States.
This specific country is exceptionally prosperous and economically stable, and it is currently and proactively providing vital assistance to Ukraine. It is precisely its significant and impactful monetary investments and resources that are now quite substantial, effectively allowing for the comprehensive coverage of the essential equipment and aid that the United States does not currently provide or transfer at this time.
Belgium, Sweden, Denmark, Spain, Canada, Iceland, Australia, Portugal, Turkey, Slovenia, as well as the Baltic countries have also joined the Ramstein initiative. The majority of those nations listed have primarily focused on purchasing advanced American weapons systems.
This current format now, especially when we see such substantial and highly significant financial resources being allocated, allows us to engage in deeper discussions about strategy, about forming certain specific requests for the future, and most importantly, this format clearly demonstrates that the strategic objectives and long-term plans of Vladimir Putin to stop all aid to Ukraine in the near future, both in terms of economic support and military assistance, have completely and utterly failed to materialize. And the entire Kremlin strategy of deliberately dragging out the conflict over a long period of time was based entirely on this false assumption.
At the same time, it is worth noting that right after Ramstein, the next meetings of leaders on military issues are taking place at the Munich conference. And the fact that the US has come there for the first time with an expanded delegation clearly indicates that the states do not intend to distance themselves from the defense of Europe.
And what do you think about these events? Share your opinion in the comments. Don't forget to like and share this video. Stay with us because it only gets more interesting from here.